Good morning, Cherries fans, and welcome to this latest show here on Up the Cherries in all departments. So yesterday, Gary O'Neill was appointed permanent manager at AFC Bournemouth. And what we are doing in the show is speaking to an expert about that appointment, of course, Marcelo Bielsa, and how close we come, and a lot more. Before we do that, here's a little bit about our sponsors, Dental on the Banks. To find out what they can do for you, visit dentalonthebanks.co.uk. Now, our special guest is a journalist and can be seen on Sky Sports News. It is a pleasure to talk about Gary O'Neill's appointment with Mark McAdam. Good evening, Mark. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks, team. How are you?
Yeah, very well. And thank you so much for joining us on this show. So, of course, Gary O'Neill has been appointed the Bournemouth manager on a permanent basis. It did look like earlier on in the week it was going to happen. Was all the signs there at that point that Gary was going to get the gig?
I think, let's be honest, there was only two people ever in the running to become the new Bournemouth manager. One of them was Gary O'Neill. The other one was, as we know, Marcelo Bielsa. And I think the last two games and the fact that Gary O'Neill steadied a really unstable ship over the course of 3 and a bit months. And I think he just deserved the right to keep this team in the Premier League. He deserved the right to be called the Bournemouth head coach. He'd earned that opportunity. He'd obviously got his coaching badges. He started coaching many years ago. He'd been at the Liverpool under-23s. He'd come into Bournemouth in February 2021. He's been a big part of the backroom setup, the coaching setup. He's been popular amongst the players. He's done really well for the managers he's worked under. And I think anyone that comes in off the back of a 9-0 victory, keeps a clean sheet, goes unbeaten for 6 matches, gets through in the League Cup and picks up some big results in the Premier League for a side that on paper isn't the best in the Premier League, deserves every opportunity. And I think it's great for Gary. I think it's great for the football club. And I think this could be a really positive step. You know, I was there back in 2008-9 when we gave this guy called Eddie Howe a chance, someone who was a fan's favourite and an incredible player, but untested and untried as a coach and a manager. And that one didn't work out too bad at all. So I'm delighted for Gary. And I think despite the length of time it's taken, this is a really strong appointment by the club.
And that's one thing I've come under a little bit of criticism for, is comparing the Gary O'Neill appointment with that of Eddie Howe. And there is similarities there. That we, after that 9-0 defeat, we were literally at ground zero. The confidence was gone. Scott Parker had come out and criticised his own players, which for a fairly young squad, which we've got, is possibly the worst thing for them. And the board, after Scott made those comments, how quickly did the board move to actually appoint Gary? Did they have it straight away in their mind? Did they have other candidates, do you reckon?
I think when Bournemouth, going back to, you know, the post-Liverpool match scenario, I don't think really the board had ever really planned to get rid of Scott Parker. I think they were, really, really kind of resolute in that their process and their decision with any managerial change wouldn't be made before the World Cup. I think naturally, like a lot of clubs, the World Cup during this season was a good point to just assess, have a look, reflect. If you do want to make a change, you've got 4, 5, 6 weeks to make a change. You bring in a new manager. Essentially, they've got a pre-season to work with the players. They've got time to kind of assess what they've got. Then you've got a January transfer window. But I don't think that this was a decision that the club had decided we're gonna make a change. We're gonna get rid of Scott Parker. I think this was a reaction off the back of some really disappointing comments they felt within the media. I think the statement kind of told you all you needed to know. A lack of identity and sort of collective thinking in the transfer window. Perhaps a lack of empathy with regards to the financial situation. Obviously, at the time, there was a takeover going on in the background, hence why Maxim didn't want to invest 50, 60, 70 million pounds during the summer window, because he was about to sell the football club. So therefore, you have to understand that, some things you just have to be a little bit patient with. And therefore, I think the other thing, the big word that stuck out for me was the word respect. And I don't think perhaps there was a lot of respect shown by Scott Parker to the situation, to the ownership, to the board, and to what was going on. That's in the past now. Scott Parker will always go down as a brilliant manager for Bournemouth, someone that went in the Championship with very little time during pre-season, built a squad that got promoted. The first time of asking for him, the second time of asking for the football club, and signed some really good, strong players that we'll see the results of over the coming years. So I think he'll always go down in history as someone that did a brilliant job for Bournemouth. I just think that there was it's almost like a relationship, isn't it? Things go really well at the beginning and you're on the same path, and then you do that and the club went this way and Scott went this way, and it was just one of those things. That's football.
There's also been a lot of criticism of the club, and especially Neill Blake and Richard Hughes, with regards to this appointment and really the length of time it's taken. I guess a lot of that is down to the ownership, but a lot of people are also harking back to the Tyndall appointment. Also when Woodgate was appointed, and when we were linked with names like Patrick Vieira, Thierry Henry, those sort of names. But again, we have recruited and put somebody in charge who knows the club inside out. And would you agree with me, Mark, that a great player, Vieira was a great player, Henry was a great player, and we could even say the same about Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard, but they don't necessarily make great managers?
Absolutely. Was Mourinho a great player? Was Arsene Wenger a great player? Not really. Are they great managers? Absolutely. So I don't really think that there's anything to look into when it comes to great players and great managers. It really frustrates me, watching from the outside as I do, a Bournemouth fan first and foremost, that the criticism that the club get. How many times do you see clubs appoint a caretaker manager after 3 games? They've won 3 games. Let's give them the job. And 6 months later, they're sacking him. What the club have done, in my mind, is they've taken, first and foremost as well, we have to remember there's a takeover going on in the background. So Maxim can't appoint a manager for then Bill Foley to come in and say, well, actually, I don't like that manager, I want to sack you. That's just not good for anyone. That's not healthy for the football club. It's not good for the people that are getting sacked. It's not good for the people that are coming into the club. The first thing they do is sack the manager. So it was always right that they had to try and leave it as long as possible, because they wanted, of course, the takeover to get sorted, and therefore Bill Foley to have a really clear input in who was to become the new manager. This is the face of his football club. He's just spent £120 million, although it's not been rubber stamped by the Premier League, on this football club. He should have the right to say who the manager is. So there's obviously had to be some joined up thinking between Maxim, between Bill and Neil and Richard. So I have no issue with them taking their time, doing proper due diligence, checking to see what managers are out there, who would want to come into Bournemouth and work with this group of players. It has to be someone that fits in with the DNA and the philosophy of the football club, someone that understands the Premier League, someone that understands the working relationships within the club, someone that knows the team, knows the level, and can get the best out of the players. So take your time. You don't make this decision overnight. Don't make this decision off the back of a couple of positive results. So I have no issue there with the time that it's taken. I can guarantee Bournemouth fans the two things that Neil and Richard want to do is get it absolutely spot on, because they care passionately and deeply about the football club, and they want to have a successful club that stays in the Premier League for many, many years. So do they want to get this decision wrong? Do they want to make a flippant choice? Of course not. So I have no problem with that. The World Cup is a nice natural break. And let's be honest, after 6 games unbeaten, I don't think there were too many people criticising the length of time it was taking. I think everyone was quite relaxed with the situation. Clearly, Gary was having a big impact on the players. They were, winning games. They were scoring goals. They were coming from behind. They were, tight defensively. They looked exciting when they went forward. And they showed all the qualities that you'd like to show from a Bournemouth side. So, any criticism aimed at the board, I think, is pretty poor, in all honesty. I think, that fans get passionate about things and they see one side of a story and one side of a situation, but there are so many things at play and there is so much stuff to be managed, to be looked at. It's not just a manager, it's an assistant manager, it's coaching staff, it's physios, it's analysts. There's a whole big backroom team of people behind the team. And every decision you make affects everyone's life, everyone's livelihood. So they have to take time. Obviously, we know that there was communication with regards to Marcelo Bielsa. He was keen on the Bournemouth project, and you can understand why. And there was obviously clearly an appetite for the club to investigate whether that would be a possibility. And again, that would come with some massive positives and potentially some negatives. But I think the bottom line is the way Gary has turned things around, the way that the players have improved under him and worked under him, the performances have been really solid from, let's be honest, a team on paper that isn't the strongest in the Premier League, a team that was predicted to go down as 20th out of 20 by every single pundit that covers football, is suddenly a side that's in 14th. And they've scored 12 goals in their last 4 games before the World Cup break. So, let's be honest, Gary's earned this opportunity, and I'm delighted that he's been given this opportunity. If you look at the metrics and the data of player individual performances, the kilometres that are covered, the work rate, the sprints, all those silly little things that are massively important in football now, the players have all stepped up. Now, players don't step up for a manager or a coach that they don't buy into and don't rate and don't like. So I think that's that situation. When you go back to, David Wagner, Patrick Vieira, Thierry Henry, Jonathan Woodgate, this situation, was it February, March last year? They're in a really tricky position. I had no issue with Jason Tindall being the manager. I think Jason had given everything to the club as a player. He'd invested so much into Bournemouth. He was brilliant as an assistant manager. He worked so well with Eddie, and he deserved the opportunity. And, the choice was made to get rid of him. And obviously, the people they spoke to, let's be honest, you bring in someone like Thierry or Patrick, they're really expensive. There's no guarantee that either of them will be successful. They'll bring in a big backroom team themselves. And those decisions could be costly for the football club. And Jonathan had come in, he stabilised the ship, took us into the Championship playoffs. We were beaten by the side that got promoted, a side that actually now has proven to be a really good Premier League side, Brentford under Thomas Frank. So there was no shame there. So I've got no issue with anything the club have done. They're making massive decisions that, affect the whole dynamic of the club, and they're under huge pressure, and they're just trying to find the right balance. And sometimes taking a step back, taking your time to make the choice, and then deciding what you want to do is the right thing. But ultimately, these decisions always lay at the floor of Maxim in the past, and now moving forward will be Bill Foley's decisions. So Richard and Neil and the board can only present the opportunities and the people that they have at play and say, well, these are the people. Let's look at Wolves, for example, struggled to get a manager in. Lopetegui turned them down at first, then they went for Mick Beale, and then they end up going back to Lopetegui, and that's the way these things go. Sometimes it can be really tough. I don't think there's a big number of top quality managers out there that are available right now. And I think Gary is the right man to take on this challenge, and I think he deserves that. And I think we'll see some very strong performances between now and the end of the season.
Of course, Marcelo Bielsa was mentioned, and it seemed like a strong link. It seemed like it was something that was going to potentially happen. And I had a conversation, and it was a World Cup preview of Argentina with Alejo Ribera, so a journalist in Argentina. And he thought it was pretty much a done thing. He thought that Marcelo Bielsa had learned everything about the players, everything about the club, and everything about the town. Do you think that Marcelo was very, very much invested in coming to the football club and has just been turned down by the board? Or do you think there's something else behind it?
No, I think what you said there, I don't think it ever got to a point where he was on the verge of being appointed. My understanding was that it was always a two-horse race. There were two options to become the new Bournemouth head coach or manager. It was either Marcelo Bielsa or Gary O'Neill. I think from the early conversations the club had, that he was interested in the project. He was interested in coming down to the South Coast. He was keen on working with the group and seeing where he could take them. And then ultimately, Gary, who'd been doing a really good, positive job, was already in place, was already working there. And, again, like I said, deserved the opportunity to see if he could keep Bournemouth in the Premier League. And I think it was a genuine, coin toss. Ultimately, I'm sure Bill Foley was the man that held the deciding vote. I don't think Bournemouth will ever get the opportunity to appoint the godfather of football coaching, the godfather of Argentinian football, someone that's, managed huge clubs and achieved so much and had such a positive impact on so many football coaches. You speak to Pep Guardiola, you speak to Eddie Howe, you speak to so many people in the game. Everyone will have something positive to say about Bielsa. I don't think Bournemouth will get the opportunity to work with someone like him for a long, long time, if ever at all. And I think when you look at the out of work managers and you go through the list of people that Bournemouth could potentially recruit, I think there was one man at the top, and that was Marcelo Bielsa. And I think the other man that could have become the Bournemouth manager was the man that was doing a brilliant job, and that was Gary O'Neill. And I think that was quite simple. The board got to that place where they went, right, well, these are the two best options. So now it's over to you to make the decision. And I think that's kind of essentially what happened.
I did see one comment on Twitter, and again, just going back to, is that this is a Neill Blake and Richard Hughes appointment. It's not so much a Bill Foley appointment. And that effectively it is a case that Bill Foley has given them, well, he's from Vegas, let's link it to that, given them the chance to roll the dice. Whereas if it doesn't work out, how much scrutiny would Neill Blake and Richard Hughes be under at that point, considering Bill Foley's going to be taking charge of the club?
I would be surprised if this wasn't a Bill Foley appointment. I believe it was a Bill Foley appointment. I believe he had the decision to make. I think the club is going to operate in a very similar way moving forward as it has done in the past. Richard Hughes is responsible for the football side of the football club. Neill Blake is responsible for the commercial and off the field side of the football club, and they work very closely together. And I think what would have happened, as has done in the past, when it comes to managers or players, Richard and Neill work really hard on these are the options that are available. We're trying to sign a left back. These are the five options that we have. This is what he wants. This is what he'd cost. This is what his agent wants. These are the wages. This is the deal. And they present it to the manager, and they present it to Maxim, and Maxim will sign it off. And I'm pretty certain that system that's been in place for a number of years, that's been very successful, will be in place for this situation. I don't think that this is, where Neill and Richard sit there and go, right, this is the man we want and we're going to appoint him. They will do a presentation and say, these are the positives for Marcelo Bielsa. These are the positives for Gary O'Neill. This is the information. This is the due diligence. These are our reports. This is the work that we've done. It's over to you. Now you can make the decision. This is our recommendations. These are what we think. Now you make the decision. It's Bill Foley's decision to make. Like I said, he is the owner of Bournemouth, all but officially the owner of Bournemouth. And obviously when Maxim was in place, he was the owner that made the decisions and had the final call. So I don't think fans getting carried away that Neil and Richard are playing fantasy football and making all the decisions. I think that they're doing their job to report to the owner, and then ultimately he will use that information to make the decision. And I think, let's be honest, two very different managers in Bielsa and O'Neill, both with positives and negatives. And I know it's easy to turn around and say as a fan, oh, we should have gone for Bielsa. He was the right man. Yeah, that's fine. But when he wants to bring in 12 members of backroom team, and he wants to bring in this, and he wants to change this, and he wants to control this, and he wants to do that, and it's going to cost this, and it's going to cost that. That's fine. It would be, and again, a very different direction for the club. The first time in 122 years, 3 years, that they've appointed a foreign manager, etc., etc., etc. That's one way to go. And then Gary O'Neill's a bit different, a bit more safe, perhaps with some respects, but someone that is, hugely exciting as a coach. I think it's safe to say as well that Gary O'Neill could have left Bournemouth over the last 3 months. There were a number of other clubs that were very interested in him, and he remained loyal to the club and stayed to carry on, even though there was no guarantee he'd have a job at the end of it. I think that shows a lot about his character and the type of person he is, and how highly he values the club as well. And I think that's basically the sort of situation as I understand it. So I think it's an exciting time, new manager. But I think Bill Foley would have been very, very heavily involved in the decision-making process.
I had the chance, and I was lucky enough to actually meet and spend quite a bit of time with Gary O'Neill before the Brentford game. And one thing that I got from him that was he was studying Brentford and all the eventualities and showed so much dedication. And actually, what you just said there brings it on to the next point as well, is I've seen a conversation on Facebook. It's not negative against the appointment, but somebody's put on there, I'm wondering what might have been had we got Bielsa. And the response to that is losing the Bournemouth spirit. And that is what is so important to this club, isn't it?
Absolutely. This football club has been built on community, togetherness, and I say this in every interview when I talk about the club: together, anything is possible. This is a football club that's gone from second bottom in League Two to the Premier League and stayed there for 5 years and gone back down and come back up again. And you look at the size of the clubs in League One. Ipswich and Sheffield Wednesday and Portsmouth, and you can talk about the great clubs in the Championship. And Bournemouth are ahead of them in the footballing pyramid. What does that say about this football club? And it's been built on, fighting against the odds and the community spirit and togetherness and young, attractive football with exciting young, raw players. And that's what this football club is about. And perhaps that could have been lost a little bit in the club appointing Bielsa if that's what they decided to do. I think Gary O'Neill very much gets what Bournemouth's about. He understands the history of the club and where they've come from and what they're trying to do. I also think as well, Gary O'Neill built a team that was 2-0 up against Tottenham. Gary O'Neill built a team that was 3-1 up against Leeds. If we'd held on in both of those games, we'd be sat here now going, no other man should have been even thought about. Bournemouth could be in the top 10 at 8th or 9th or something on 19, 20 points. And suddenly everyone's going, well, this is just incredible. He's done an unbelievable job. But a manager can't cater for a team being 2 goals clear in matches and then throwing it away. That's ultimately down to the players. That's where they've got to learn to see out games and be more professional and be solid and make the right choices. A manager can't be on the pitch. You can only put them in the best possible position to win the game. So when you go back to, you look at things and you look at the situation and how different things could have been if they'd appointed Bielsa, it would have been a very, very different club in many ways. It could have been brilliant. We could have been in the bottom 3 by March. that's the great thing about football. You never know.
Let's fast forward then to World Cup's ended. And of course, we've got Newcastle in the Carabao Cup, and then, of course, Chelsea just after Boxing Day in the Premier League. What, from that point onwards, because of course we've got the January transfer window coming up, what do you think that Gary O'Neill needs to do? And do you think he's already planning in this World Cup break about what his next move is?
Yeah, I think he would have spent the last week or so, the last 2 or 3 weeks, looking at every eventuality, every possibility, and trying to structure and plan things around getting the best possible results. I think clearly the January transfer window will be a fascinating one to watch. I can't wait as a former fan, as a football man, as a transfer reporter. I can't wait to see what the club does and the types of players that they try and recruit. Clearly, if everything is done and dusted with regards to the takeover and the new owner, I think he'll want to invest in January. I don't think there's many owners that will buy a club and then go, well, we're not going to invest any money on players. They'll want to go and invest, and they'll want to back the manager, and they'll want to sign good quality players. So I think that will be really interesting to see how that plays out. And of course, the matches as well. The Chelsea game, the Newcastle game are going to be really tough games. I think, for Bournemouth, most matches in the Premier League this season were always going to be difficult. I think we just have to do what we've done: score goals, look exciting when we go forward, be as tight defensively as we possibly can, and whatever happens, just be walk off that pitch with the fans at the Vitality being really proud of the players for the commitment and effort and desire that they've shown, on the pitch. I think we all know deep down, and anyone who's being realistic and anyone who understands football, that this season is going to be a huge challenge for the club. If the club finish 17th, that is a brilliant achievement as far as I'm concerned. If we can be competitive in every single game, if we can score goals and play the attractive football that we're renowned for, then brilliant. And if we can be, in and amongst, the bottom half of the table, pushing to mid-table if we can, and be in the Premier League for a second year, what that does is it allows the club to grow and build, invest more money. We know that there's work happening with the training ground. I can't say too much, but I know that the new owner is super excited about the project and about the club and about the infrastructure, about the stadium, about doing all the right things and investing in the right way and growing the club organically. So I think, and that will naturally be the same for Gary. He'll be looking at the short term, the medium term, the long term. How can I put things in place at this football club that mean it grows on and off the pitch?
Of course, Bill Foley's takeover hopefully should be rubber stamped soon. I'm guessing that is going to happen during this World Cup break.
I'd be surprised if it didn't. I think we've all been waiting around, sort of thinking, well, it's going to be this week, it's going to be this week. Normally, the owners and directors test is, say, 6 to 8 weeks. Essentially, that's the time it takes for the Premier League to do the work and the due diligence they need to do to investigate everything fully. Where's the money coming from? Who's involved? Who's on the board? Who's the consortium? Where's this happening? What are you going to do with the club? Where's the investment? What happens if things go wrong? Blah, 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 blah. All the things that they need to do to satisfy themselves that they are putting in place an ownership that is responsible and has the best interests of the club at heart. Now, that obviously takes time. Now we're a lot closer to the end than the beginning of this process. I'd be surprised if it wasn't sorted out before Christmas. I don't have any dates as of yet, but I'd like to think that by the middle of December, I would have thought this would all be done and dusted, and it could be a lot sooner than then. But I think we are edging closer to a resolution and a confirmation of what we know to be the case, that Bill Foley will be the new owner of AFC Bournemouth, which I think is hugely exciting.
It certainly is. Fast forwarding a little bit further on as well. So we finished 17th. So we've got a second season to look forward to in the Premier League. Of course, the stakes. Bill Foley, Vegas man, and of course he's Vegas Golden Knights. He's done a fantastic job there. And I saw an interview with him, and he was like, he wants to be the very, very best. And, if he doesn't see his ice hockey team being the very best, he does change things. What do you think the minimum expectation would be going into that second season? And what do you think that Bill Foley would probably throw towards Gary O'Neill to help him achieve that?
So if we stay up this season,
Yeah.
what would be the expectation next season? I don't know Bill Foley, so I can't. It's hard to comment. Mm-hmm. As a fan, the only thing I want to see is progress. You know, I think that's the one thing. If we finish 17th this season, the next season you want to finish better than 17th. You want to score more goals. You want to pick up more points. You want to win more games. Sometimes the league table can be a little bit deceptive because you can finish 17th one season and finish 12th the following season, but actually the season where you finished 17th could have been a better season for various reasons, because of, you know, goals, performances, results, you know, more picking up more points against the big six, whatever. So ultimately it's just progress. I think, you know, let's see progress on the field. Let's see progress off the field. Let's see attacking football. Let's see young players. You know, are Bournemouth going to sign players that stay with Bournemouth for the rest of their career? No, we're not. You know, we're always going to be a stepping stone to, you know, players in the EFL. We're always going to be a stepping stone to sides that are selling from Europe, because players will come over to Bournemouth. They think if they play well and put themselves in the shop window, they can move on to another football club in the Premier League and get another opportunity. And I think we have to understand that that's our place in the system. But can we play the most exciting football? Can we be really competitive? Can we produce young players? Can we make money? You know, let's be honest. You know, we want to see a club that's sustainable. We want to see a club that generates cash from players, that gets reinvested into the academy. You know, we want to see more Jay-Z's, more Jadon Anthony's, and more Gavin Kilkennys, and more players like that coming through the system and playing, you know, from Boscombe Park pitches to the Bournemouth first team. We want to see that. So I think it's all about development. And I think if we can continue to do that over this period of time, then I think that's the most important thing. I think that's a really sort of sensible way to look at it. We also have to bear in mind that football's football, and sometimes things don't go to plan. You know, we got relegated with Eddie Howe as manager. You know, with a team that had Aaron Ramsdale in, and a team that had Nathan Ackey in, a team that had Callum Wilson in. You know, look at the team that got relegated. That was a really, you know, a good team. These things happen in football, but as we've seen in the recent history, we've got a board and an infrastructure and a system in place that means the club is really strong financially. That was something that was really important to Maxim. If the club went down, we could still survive, and we could still invest, and we could still produce players, and we could still be competitive. I think when you look at so many sides that have come down from the Premier League, Swansea, Huddersfield, Stoke, and so on and so forth, and they've struggled to get back up, I think that is another massive indicator as to how well Richard and Neill and Maxim have done to be able to put the club in a place where they go down and come back at the second time of asking. You know, again, that's another massive positive that perhaps maybe too many fans aren't talking about. You know, the fact that we've got a team that's now in the Premier League. So I just think, you know, moving forward, the key thing is stick to our principles, and you know, let's do what we're renowned for really, really well. And you know, see if we can just keep building the club. I think, you know, we want a legacy for being in the Premier League, and the most positive legacy we can have is not just being in the Premier League and finishing 17th every season. It's about building a fan base. We got at the minute 6,000-7,000 season ticket holders. You know, we want to have 16,000, 17,000 season ticket holders. We want every single kid in Bournemouth and Boscombe and around the area wearing a Bournemouth top, not wearing a Man City or a Chelsea top. You know, we want young families to come to the stadium, and a bigger stadium with more seats and more capacity. We want to extend our reach into the community. You know, let's put on more coaching. You know, Steve Cuss does incredible work in the community. It's incredible work. I've seen it firsthand at how good that is. Imagine if we can double our efforts and triple our efforts. And it's just about developing the club in every single aspect in a positive way. That's the most important thing for me.
And of course, two players you mentioned there, Jadon Anthony and Jordan Zamora. They are both out of contract at the end of the season. But how pivotal is this managerial appointment going to be to keeping those two playing for AFC Bournemouth?
It's going to be interesting. Let's be honest. These are, I'm looking from the outside. Two young kids that have come through the 18s under Alan Connell together, played in the 23s, got given their opportunity in the first team when perhaps if a manager had been in place, if Scott Parker had been in place maybe 6 to 12 weeks earlier, they may have been 2 or 3 more signings in through the door, and Jay-Z and Jaden Anthony wouldn't have got their opportunity in the first team. I think it was at Nottingham Forest away. David Brooks scored the brilliant goal. I think we won 2-1. You know, you had Ryan Glover on the bench, Brendan Camp on the bench. Obviously Jay-Z and Jaden played, and there just wasn't a lot of strength in depth at that time. They got given their opportunity, and they, boy, did they take it with both hands. And they were exceptional in that championship campaign. Absolutely brilliant. And the problem is with young lads that come through the system is that they don't earn anywhere near what other players would earn. You know, you've got young players, I don't know what they were on, but it would have been peanuts in relative terms. It's difficult for me to comment on the situation, but what happens generally, and I'm not referring to Jay-Z and to Jaden in these situations, and this is the same for all transfer dealings and all situations. Mason Mount, for example, at the moment, allegedly has turned down £200,000 a week at Chelsea. Now, if Chelsea went and signed a player from Europe that played in Mason's position with his statistics, they'd be expected to pay £250,000 to £300,000 a week. Raheem Sterling, for example, international for England, won it all with Manchester City, Liverpool, big Premier League player, 300 grand a week. Jack Grealish, 300 grand a week. Harry Kane, all those players that play for England. Mason Mount is in the same bracket as those players. He deserves to earn the same amount of money. But because he's come through the system, because he isn't on vast amounts of money, because he is one of the lower earners, shall we say, at Chelsea, they're looking at it going, well, we don't want to pay him that amount because we haven't bought him from Real Madrid. He's come through our academy. So you look at the dynamic. I think you understand what I'm trying to say. And This is a similar situation here. Do these lads, if Bournemouth went out and bought a left back, they'd probably expect to pay between, 7.5 to 12.5 million and pay 25 grand a week.
Yeah.
Do they want to pay Jay-Z 25 grand a week? Probably not, because, he's come from the academy. He's come through the system. He's not earning that amount of money. So it's just about striking the right balance and getting what the lads feel is fair and what they deserve. The club feeling like they're getting value for money. They've given them the platform and the opportunity to play and prove themselves. And it's always tough. It's always really, really tough to get these things right and fair and do things in the right way. If they leave the club, then obviously the club will be due some money because of the rules and regulations in place for players under the age of 24. If they can strike a deal, then fantastic. Which way it will go, I don't know. I should imagine that Jay-Z and Jaden want to stay and extend their time at Bournemouth and continue that development and partnership. And if they move on, they move on. It's one of those things. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, shall we say?
Just going back to the Bielsa rumours. Was it true that he didn't get the job because he was after a certain amount of money?
Let's be honest. Marcelo Bielsa is a high-profile, highly regarded, experienced manager. They're not cheap. He would have probably been on, best part of £4.5 million at Leeds a year plus bonuses, which would have taken him into that kind of, £6-7 million a year bracket. And most managers will turn around and say to the owners, if I keep the team in the Premier League and that's worth 150 million minimum to you, then I deserve a couple of £1 million as a bonus on top of my wages. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was on that kind of a figure. That would generally be what most managers are on. Whatever Gary O'Neill's on, half of that, a quarter of that, the same as that, whatever it is. Do I think that the Bournemouth board would have looked at it and made it a decision purely based on finances? Not really. When you're looking at these kind of figures, 150, 60, 70, 80 million pounds a year, is a couple of £1 million on a manager, the main man, the most important figure at the football club, going to affect your decision when it could result in, so much more? I don't think so. Clearly, if Bielsa was to come into the football club and bring in 12 members of staff, then of course that has another financial impact on the club. And it might mean that you have to sack 12 people as well, which is expensive. And perhaps as a package, things could have looked a little bit heavy financially. But I genuinely don't believe that the club would have skimped and saved a few quid to appoint one manager and not the other. I don't think that would have been something that was on their radar. I think they would have just looked to do what they thought was the best and the right thing for the club.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to O'Neill, I'm reading today that Neil Critchley is in talks to become his number 2. So which obviously would mean Tommy Elflick and Sean Cooper will go back to their previous positions, I'm assuming. Is there any truth in that? Or? So
the only thing I know at the moment is that the club are still working on the makeup of Gary's backroom team. Only today have they announced that he is now the head coach, signing an 18-month deal. So that's sort of, part 1, phase 1 done. Now it's about, right, what would you like in place behind you? What would you like in terms of your support staff? Who are the people that you'd like to bring into the football club? In terms of the Neil Critchley thing, I'm a bit like you. I've seen the rumours, but I don't have any evidence or information to substantiate or confirm that at the moment. But once again, Gary will be speaking to people he's worked with, people he knows, coaches he knows that can do the right job. So it's probably just a little bit of a process. The lads are back in tomorrow, which is going to be Monday, for the first time after a little break for the first week of the World Cup. So I think Gary will start to get to work, and he'll start to build the people in and around the group that he thinks are going to improve it. I think Sean Cooper and Tommy have been outstanding. I think they are 2 players that absolutely 1,000,000% get the ideals and history and DNA of this football club. I'd like to think that they would be involved moving forward in some capacity. But if they're not, then they're very much going to be welcome doing what they did before, if that's what they feel they want to do. I think, both of them are on a journey themselves. They're right in the first knockings of management. I don't think they're going to be, desperate to head out the exit if they don't get the role and opportunity they feel they deserve at the football club. I think they'll still be around for a long time, and I think they'll be a big part of Bournemouth moving forward. And I definitely think both of them will be managers in the EFL in the years to come, and potentially even Bournemouth managers of the future. I think that's something that's really important for this football club, is succession planning. They want people in place that can step in and drop in and push up and move on and be a part of things. I think you look at Brighton, that's something that they've done really successfully over the years. They lose a key member of staff and someone comes in that's already been at the football club, and so on and so forth. And I think that's something that Bournemouth are looking to do as well. So it'd be interesting to see. But the makeup of the backroom team is being sorted as we speak, and perhaps over the next week or 2, maybe we'll see some movement there, and maybe see 1 or 2 new faces coming in.
And how close do you reckon Gary was going to Luton? Is that all just rumour, or did they actually approach the club for his services at all?
I don't know how close it came. I think, I don't know, but I think there was 3 or 4 Championship clubs that were really interested in Gary O'Neill. I don't know how formal their applications and approaches were, but I know that he was absolutely in the conversation for a number of big Championship clubs, because clearly he was doing a good job at Bournemouth in the Premier League. He's got a good pedigree. He's got, he does all the right things, says all the right things. He looks good, and clearly he's having an impact on players. So, yeah, absolutely there were opportunities, and potentially Luton could have been one of them. I don't know the intricate details of that, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was on their list of top 3, because, he's a really, really highly regarded and well thought of coach in the EFL. So, yeah, that's something I don't know, but yeah, I could have imagined that they would have been interested in him, that's for sure.
And really, the final question I've got, of course, it's been announced on the Bournemouth website that Gary O'Neill has signed initial 1.5-year contract with the provision to be extended for a further 12 months. Is this provision effectively, if the club are happy with what Gary has done, they can just get that contract signed without Gary agreeing to that, or would it all have to be ratified in a new contract effectively?
I don't know. It's one of those things. It's essentially, contracts are bizarre. You can give someone a 10-year contract, but if the termination clause is 6 months, then it's a 6-month contract. That's the thing about all these deals. It's the fine print, it's the small print. We can sack you and give you 6 months money if the team's in the bottom three. If you don't win a game for 6, then we can sack you and give you 3 months money. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You could sign a 50-year contract, but if you lose 3 games on the spin and the club have the opportunity to sack you, then they can do it, and that's in the contract, and that's in the contract. So, I think the contract is a sensible one. It gives the club a little bit of protection. Just say Gary O'Neill wins the next 8 games, and a bigger Premier League side come in and say, we want Gary O'Neill as our manager. Then the club would get remunerated because of the contract that's in place. If things don't go so well, then the last thing you want to do is be paying a manager 5, 10, 15, 25, 50 million pounds to get sacked. So, it actually looks like really sensible business for me. It's enough time for Gary to know that he's got a little bit of time there to start to build something. And if things go well, then that will get extended very quickly. But on the flip side, if things don't go to plan, then it's not going to cost the club an arm and a leg to get rid of a manager, because I've seen it so many times in the Premier League where clubs stick with a manager because they can't afford to sack him, but they don't like him and they don't think he's doing a very good job. But actually, we can't afford to get rid of him, so we just got to ride it out, and we just got to weather the storm and hope that results improve. So that's the worst thing that any club could do. So, looking from the outside, I think, that's absolutely what he deserved. And I think that's sensible from his perspective and the club's perspective.
Well, thank you so much for coming on this show today, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you, and all the very, very best with Sky Sports News and whatever you put your hand to. I'm sure covering the World Cup in quite some detail as well.
Bit of World Cup, bit of Soccer Saturday. And then guess what happens on January the 1st? Transfer window's back.
Exactly.
Oh, yes.
Exactly. And you will have your finger on the pulse, I'm sure, at that point.
I'll try. Yeah, you've got to cover a lot, but I'll do my best. I think I always say the most important thing for me is be accurate. Like I don't need to be first with the information. I just need to try and be accurate. And if I'm second or third or fourth with information, but it's true and accurate, then that's better than putting stuff out that's wrong. And that's the only thing I can try and do. And the other thing as well is, things change quickly. You can get a phone call and have one piece of information, and 24 hours later it's completely dead, and it looks like you're wrong. But that is your information at the time. So I'll just try my best as a Bournemouth fan to give Bournemouth fans the news they want to hear, knowing that hopefully it's 99.9% accurate, which is not always easy to do in football.
Let's be honest, during the January transfer window and during the summer transfer window, if you reported everything, every single rumour that was out there, we'd be linked to about 40, 50 different players. So, I completely agree with you. And that's why we all tune into Sky Sports News instead of other sources on the internet, so shall we say.
My pleasure, guys. See you soon.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us on this show. Please remember to hit the like, the subscribe, the bell button. Do leave your comments below as well about what you think. We will have lots more content coming up for you over the coming weeks. Of course, we have got the World Cup going on at the moment. So by all means, we will have some more features on that. But until the next one, up the cherries, and we'll speak to you soon. Thanks for joining us.